Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jumping with Jumi. It is great to see all of you tuning in. I am super excited to have you here because you're in for another great episode. If you didn't know, June is National Soul Food Month. As much as we all love our favorite comfort foods, myself included, some of the things that we are eating are loaded with sugars and saturated fats, and they are contributing to our deteriorating heart health. So, diet is one of those things that we can easily improve in order to reduce our risk for heart disease. So, today's episode is all about that. Remember, almost 50% of African American women over the age of 20 have heart disease, and it's the number one leading cause of death for women in the US. So, this episode is incredibly important. We all need to have this conversation about reducing our risk, starting with making better dietary choices. Today, I'm bringing back my favorite cardiologist. She's based in Miami, Florida, and is the medical director at the Jackson Health System Cardiology Ambulatory Clinic. She serves as a mentor for Black female medical students at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, which I love, and currently serves on the board of directors for the Florida chapter of the American College of Cardiology. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Sankasani.
Hi, Jumi. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Sankasani. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
It is good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you for coming back and joining me on the show today.
Of course.
So let's get right into it because I can talk about food all day, and I know that you can talk about heart health all day. So this is about to be a very fun conversation. So why is it so important that we are addressing heart health from the dietary perspective today?
Yes, I think, one of the biggest things that we can do to try and decrease our risk is partly what we're putting into our body. A lot of our risk, especially we talked about last time, risk factors for heart disease like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, that is a lot of times affected by the foods that we're putting into our body. Yes, there's some of it that's genetics and you can't control that. So why don't we control the things that we can, right? And the way that we're eating and the way we're putting fuel and nutrition into our body is one of those things that we can control. So it's super important to talk about it.
Super important. It's something that we can control. And June is National Soul Food Month, right? And so numerous studies have shown that the Southern diet is essentially to blame for why our people are more prone to hypertension. Yes. This is a food full of history and flavor. So let's talk about this because we all love it. We want to eat it, but it's messing us up. Yep. What is hypertension? And how do those foods that we love so much contribute to it?
So before we started this broadcast, I was talking to my cousin and I said, it's National Soul Food Month and I'm talking about heart health. And we both kind of went, I don't know if those two things really go together. I'm trying to think about healthy soul food and that's difficult. But yes, hypertension is high blood pressure and it's very common amongst Black individuals. And there's a huge component of it that's dietary, and especially the amount of salt that we're eating in our diet tends to be very, very high. So in addition to a high fat content, and especially the way that soul food is prepared, right? We were talking about how can we think about making soul food healthier? And he said, okay, well, maybe when you're cooking greens, well, what goes inside greens? Bacon. That's a processed meat, right? We'll talk about a bit later on maybe how dangerous processed meats actually can be and how there's lots of risk about how that increases heart disease. So you take some of the healthy aspects like collard greens and then you add bacon to it. So it's like you're adding insult to something that could potentially be very healthy for you and also has a ton of salt packed into it. So kind of a double whammy there when we're talking about salt intake.
Talk about it. So what are some of the numbers that we should be aware of when it comes to high blood pressure? Because some of these foods take us over these limits, but we don't even know what these limits are. So what are those things that we should be looking for?
So this actually changed a few years ago. So if you've been going to your doctor for a number of years for high blood pressure and getting treatment, we were always told that we were looking for that top number, which is called your systolic blood pressure, to be less than 140. And we wanted your bottom number or your diastolic blood pressure to be less than 90. Mm-hmm. But when we looked at using that as a target and a diagnosis for hypertension or high blood pressure, we were seeing that we were leaving too much people at risk. So based on the new research and data, we want that top number, that systolic blood pressure, to be less than 130 all the time.
Less than 130.
Less than 130. So it should, and the bottom number, before I go on, should be less than 80. That diastolic number should be less than 80. So less than 130 on the top, less than 80 on the bottom. If you
Okay.
look at what most people think of as a normal blood pressure, we say 120 over 80. That phrase
Mm.
has been going on for a while. People say, oh, my blood pressure is 120 over 80. And I said, well, that bottom number is too high for you. So we have to get used to talking about what a normal blood pressure is so you can recognize when you're checking your blood pressure, whether it be a monitor that you have at home, or whether it be at your doctor's office, or whether it be at your pharmacy, right? If you're going into a local pharmacy or supermarket. Important to know when you should have a kind of an eyebrow raised because your numbers are elevated. So that cutoff, it should not be over 130, and that bottom number should be less than 80.
So less than 80 bottom number, no more than 130 the top number. How often should somebody be checking for their blood pressure?
So that depends on kind of a lot of other risk factors for the patient. So if you're someone who has never been diagnosed with blood pressure, I think when you go for your annual visit or your screening visit with your doctors, that's a good time to get it checked. But if you're someone who does have high blood pressure and your blood pressure isn't well controlled, I tell most people, I tell them to take it, once a day for a while until you can get it there.
Okay.
Or take it maybe twice a week, but something where you have some sort of consistency. Don't just rely on when you go to your doctor's office, because a lot of times you're nervous, right? You
Yeah.
just drove in traffic to get there. You're worried about what the doctor is going to say, and then your blood pressure is always high. And you look at me and say, I swear to you, it's normal at home. So it's important to make sure you're monitoring your blood pressure at home so you know what your true numbers are when you're relaxed and when you're kind of in a more normal state.
Okay. And so now when we know that certain foods increase our blood pressure, eating certain foods, what are some of the foods that we should be eating to reduce our risk? I mean, obviously you said bacon and carbs, that doesn't go together. What are some things that we should be eating? What are some things that you avoid as a cardiologist and that you include in your diet when it comes to making sure your heart is okay?
So when you think about a heart healthy diet and heart healthy foods, what's really recommended and what has good research behind it. And when I say recommended, I mean by the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology, which are kind of my two, I call them governing bodies. Those are the two people and two research organizations and groups that come out with guidelines to help guide us as doctors to take care of patients. And what's recommended is to really have a diet that emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, legumes, and fish. And when you've looked at the kind of diets that really do incorporate those forms of heart healthy eating, it's a plant-based diet and a Mediterranean diet. Okay.
Okay.
And so when I say
Wait,
that to a
before we
lot of
go
people,
further, plant-based and Mediterranean, go into detail with what the difference is between those two.
so a plant-based diet is really kind of how it sounds, right? So most people will say to me, well, does that mean I have to go vegetarian or I have to be a vegan? No, there's different extremes of what a plant-based diet really means. A plant-based diet focuses on vegetables, fruits, anything that is not from an animal. And you can have animal products as well, but it should be in a lower ratio, right? So most of your diet should focus on those healthy fruits, healthy vegetables, and really limit the amount of animal-based protein that you're eating. That's probably the most healthy diet that you can do for your heart to lower that risk of heart disease.
Limiting the protein.
A Mediterranean diet, yes. So a Mediterranean diet incorporates some of the same principles, but incorporates a lot more fish and seafood into the diet than just a regular plant-based diet. So if you're going to rely on protein, right? People think that you have to have protein in your diet, and you do, but protein, automatically people think meat and chicken. Well, you also get protein from vegetables, and you also get protein from fish, and probably fish-based proteins have the best kind of protein and also the best kind of fats, right? Your body needs fat, but it needs the right kind of healthy fat.
So when it comes to the vegan and vegetarian diet, so I do see some things that say if you have those diets, you have a lower risk for factors that increase your risk for heart disease, half the risk of diabetes, reduced risk of hypertension. Is that really the case?
So the data has panned out to show that. So if you look there's data that came out through the National Health Institution, the NHANES data, and it showed that people who get most of their protein from plant-based protein, overall the decrease in death, and this is not just having heart disease, this is dying from heart disease, goes down by about 10%. And if you compare that to other types of protein, right? So that plant-based would be the best kind. And if you look at the tier below that, would be kind of lean animal protein. So if you're gonna eat meat and chicken or turkey and things along those lines, or pork, making sure you're getting lean cuts, things that don't have a lot of fat or extra fat in there. And then the worst kind of protein is actually processed meats, right? So bacon, I know that's like a big sin to say. Bacon is not good for you.
It's so
bacon,
tasty though, Dr. Lake. It's good.
I know, but yep, there's so many other ways that you can make your food taste good without adding things to it that we know can hurt your heart, right? So that's the ultimate goal at the end of the day, enjoying your food, but still making sure that it's healthy for your heart.
So what have you seen with regards to your patients and heart health? Have you seen a dramatic result when they are intentional about modifying their diet?
Oh, yes. When you have patients who are really dedicated to changing their diet, you see it in dramatic ways. Their blood cholesterol goes down. Their blood pressure goes down. They tend to lose weight, right? It's, if you're really sticking to a plant-based diet and you're really eating vegetables, fruits, nuts, beans, peas, things like that, it's hard to eat enough of that to really gain weight, right? Versus it's much easier to eat processed food and red meat that have a lot more calories in it. So if people really do stick to a strict plant-based diet, yes, you can see remarkable health differences. And this is not just anecdotal from patients that I've seen, but also you can see it in the data, and the data pans out that way when you look at overall populations. That being said, it's very hard to do that, right? If you're someone who is in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you've been eating this way for 40, 50, 60 years, it's hard all of a sudden to say, all I'm gonna do is eat, vegetables all day long. So I think people have to figure out a true lifestyle change. Don't go on a diet. Dieting is one of my least favorite words. When people say, oh, I want to, tell me how I can go on a diet. No, going on a diet is for losing weight for a particular reason, right? Your wedding's coming up. Something's happening. But you really have to figure out how you can make that lifestyle change so you can live this for 30, 40, or 50 years to come.
And so you make a good point when it's like, if you've been eating this way for so long, it's hard, but that means that we should really be geared towards the younger people and their lifestyles and their healthy eating habits right now. Are you doing work, or what are you seeing with regards to the younger people and their heart health? Because I did see something that said it's starting younger and younger now.
Right. I mean, you mentioned a scary statistic when you talk about 50% of people, over, you weren't saying people who are 50 or 60, you're saying people are in their 20s. So this is something that we need to start teaching about diet and nutrition from a much younger age than we are already. So I think that's key and that's pivotal. And sometimes it starts with, pediatricians in the office and talking to parents about the right way to provide food to their kids, making sure that they're minimizing the amount of processed things. I have a 19-month-old son, and we're trying to, as much as we can, keep him away from packaged things or processed things. But we know they're easier, right? And when you're working a job and you have family to feed, fast food, it's called that way for a reason. It's fast and it's easy, and it tends to be, unfortunately, not as healthy. So you have to really start teaching your kids from a young age healthy dietary patterns, right? Because when somebody gets to their 40s and 50s and beyond, it's much harder to change patterns that way. So starting younger is going to be extremely, extremely important.
Very important. So we do have to acknowledge the fact that there are disparities when it comes to accessing healthy food, right? You mentioned it, the fast foods, making sure people have certain different foods. How can communities, overcome that when it comes to making sure our hearts are the healthiest it can be as it pertains to diet?
So that's one thing I hear a lot from patients is that, eating eating healthier also tends to be more expensive, right? And I've heard people say that. And also access to healthier foods, it's not as easy, right? It's much more easy to pass Chipotle and Burger King and McDonald's and etc. on the road, but you're not seeing many salad stores or many stores that are, and a lot of those a lot of fast food.
And they're not drive-through, so that doesn't help.
Exactly. They're trying to produce more healthy options, fruits and etc. But you also have to be careful, right? If you go through a drive-through and you order a salad, but then you put a ton of dressing on top of it that may have 600 or 700 calories in there alone, then you're kind of fighting yourself, right? So yes, it's a big problem from a systemic standpoint, right? We're dealing with communities of color and especially Black communities where access to healthy foods has not been necessarily prioritized. And so that's a much bigger picture and much bigger deal, trying to figure out how to make that change long term. But I think it starts with education, right? If we're educating or patients like we are on this show and educating people how to eat healthy, how to choose healthier items, they're available. They may not be in the front row at the store when you get there, right? It may not be the items that are on sale or maybe more affordable, but it may be better to educate people where to find the healthy foods and make sure that they're seeking those out.
Definitely. And do you feel like it's the fact that that Southern diet, or the diet that we're so used to, is something that is a common staple? Like everybody in this country eats diets that are high in fat, sugars, fried, salty, all that stuff. Is it just that we're eating a little bit more, and because of these reasons that we just addressed in terms of lack of access?
It's hard to hear you again. Can you just repeat the last question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. No, I was saying that a lot of the Southern diet resembles the foods that the rest of the country eats, you know? And so you mentioned the lack of access and just being aware of where the foods are. Do you think that contributes to the rates of hypertension that are higher in Blacks versus any other culture?
Yeah, I know. When you see the kind of dietary patterns that you mentioned in the beginning about soul food and about the kind of foods that are eaten in more Black cultures more than others, it tends to be foods that are more high in fat, that tend to increase cholesterol, that are also high in sugar, and processed food, right? And those kind of foods tend to be much more dangerous for your heart health long term than other healthier options like we spoke about, right? So I think one thing that I try.
Uh-oh, I think you muted. Okay. All right. She'll be back, y'all. We just lost her for 2 seconds, but I think she will be back. And there she is. You're muted, Dr. Sankasani. You're not connected? She's coming back, y'all. She was talking about the fact that there's so many different things that, we can do as a community to make sure that we are eating the foods that we want to eat, but also not risking our heart health by just ignoring the other foods that we should be adding to our diets. And so, there she is. She's back. We can hear you again.
Having some connectivity issues.
It's okay. You're back. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Go ahead, Jumi. Yes, I can hear you now. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're fine. So I do want to touch on something in terms of moderation and portion control, right? I've seen a lot of people say that you can eat what you want, but it has to be in moderation or portion size, so that you're not completely foregoing the foods that you love so much. What do you say to that? How important is that when it comes to heart health?
I think that is important, right? Because when we're asking someone to make a lifestyle change, yes, I would love if all of a sudden you could automatically go to a full plant-based diet.
Right.
You lose weight, your blood pressure would come down, your cholesterol numbers would look a lot easier. But if that's not something that you enjoy, you're not going to do it for a long time. And like I said, this is not a diet. This is really a lifestyle change that I want people to make. So moderation and doing things in moderation will help people to incorporate more healthy foods into their diet, but not totally deny them of things that they enjoy eating, right? Because if I told you, you're a chocolate fanatic and you can never have chocolate again for whatever reason, then, that's the face I'm going to look, and you're going to walk out the office and you're not going to follow anything I tell you. So we have to approach things in a way that makes it easy for people to do for a long period of time. This is not something that you want someone to do for a year, right? This is truly a lifestyle change that you want for a long time. So yeah, eating healthy is important. But I tell people, hey, if there's 7 days in a week and 5 out of those days you're eating and sticking to a heart healthy lifestyle and a heart healthy way of eating, and you decide that on the weekend you want to go off track a bit,
eat some cupcakes, eat some ice cream. It's fine, right?
Don't go crazy. But,
okay, fine.
but you can go off the track a bit. Or I'll tell folks, hey, if your favorite meal is, whatever it is, you name it, you can have that on your birthday. You can have that for your anniversary. But it shouldn't be something you should be eating, every week if it's unhealthy for you. So you have to incorporate things in a way that it's going to be realistic for people to do. But also educating them about how they can make healthy substitutes on a day-to-day basis so that they're living a more heart healthy lifestyle long term.
So how closely do you work with, say, a dietitian or a nutritionist when it comes to developing these plans, these heart healthy diet plans for individuals?
So in the ambulatory care clinic that I work at Jackson Memorial Hospital, we do have a dietitian that's assigned to our cardiology office. And I highly encourage all my patients to have appointments with them to go over things, because things that seem somewhat obvious to us as healthcare professionals, people who do get a little bit more education, you'd be surprised about how, it's not common knowledge. And that's why I think these kind of forums where we're educating, people in general about how to eat healthier are so important, because they don't get that. We sometimes tend to assume. And when someone comes to my office, I have a 15 or 20-minute time slot and we have to talk about so many issues. It's hard to really go through that counseling. So having someone who's a nutritionist, who's able to really go into more detail with someone and really examine their individual diet and how they can make things better versus just giving them generalizations, I think is really, really helpful.
And what if they don't have access to a nutritionist, or they're not coming to a cardiologist? What can they do at home to make these, incremental changes?
Yes. So one thing I wanted to do, and I think this is probably a good time to do it, Jumi, is to try to figure out what are practical ways to do this, right? Because people always say to me, well, you're saying to eat more fruits, vegetables, and I kind of know what that means, but how can I incorporate small changes into my everyday routine that's going to help me eat better? And so the first thing I say is that there's a pyramid that we have, right? At the bottom of that pyramid, the thing we should take in most into our body should be water, right? So a lot of times, fruit juices, feeling guilty, Jumi?
Guilty.
So yeah, a lot of juices, even if we say, oh, we're drinking orange juice. Well, if it's in a box and you look at those ingredients, there's going to be tons of hidden sugar. That's the reason that box juice tastes so good, right? So, and if you even just go online and Google the sugar content of Powerade or Gatorade or just general juices that you drink in general, you'd be surprised. Especially soda. Sodas are laden with hidden sugar, so you can cut out so much of that extra calories, so much of that extra unhealthy kind of nutrients that you're getting by just drinking water. So I think sticking to water and fresh squeezed juices, so juices that you're squeezing from yourself or eating the fruit, right, can be a really important way to get rid of a lot of hidden sugar that you're seeing.
We've got a viewer. She drinks a gallon of water a day. Darlene, I commend you. I need to get on your level drinking a gallon of water a day. That is amazing.
So, but I think it's one trick. It takes a while, right? Because once you've been used to drinking, if you're somebody who's a soda drinker and you've been used to drinking soda throughout your life, yeah, switching to water may be hard. But I did this a few years ago. I used to love Coca-Cola, Sprite. Those were my things. And after a while, I just decided, well, it's healthier overall, and it's probably been the last 10 years. 90% of what I drink throughout the day is water. Every once in a while, I have juice and etc. But that's just, to me, that was an easy substitute. And there'd be maybe other people who find that to be an easy substitute as well. So that's kind of one trick that you can do.
So water is baseline, that we just need to increase our water intake. Replace it with, get rid of the sugars, replace it with water.
All right, so cutting out a lot of the hidden sugars that you're going to see in juices and processed kind of liquids versus just drinking water. Which water you drink, I don't care. Everybody can have their specific, like this brand or that brand, whatever it is. But as long as you're drinking water, I'm fine with that. When it comes to breakfast, right? So everyone says it's the first meal of the day, the meal of champions. The way you eat breakfast is also important. If you think about the breakfast commercials, right? You have people eating ton of cereal, they're eating bacon, they're eating potatoes, corned beef hash,
with a heap of butter and syrup.
Yes, all of that fun stuff. So try to put in other substitutes that you think could be a little bit healthier, right? So maybe egg whites instead of whole eggs, because egg yolk has a lot of cholesterol in it. Try oatmeal with fruits. Try yogurts. Try eating whole grain type of cereals instead of Frosted Flakes or whatever it may be. It's those sugary cereals that can hide a lot of that in there. So if you're and eating a muffin, try and make it a grain muffin or bran or something along those lines, so it's a little bit healthier. Still gonna have a lot of sugar in it, but doing those things in moderation and cutting out a lot of the heavy foods that you're eating for breakfast. There's also a big movement for something called intermittent fasting, and that's actually discussed in some of our literature, where a lot of people say you should probably be eating only 8 hours a day, right, or limiting that amount of time and letting your body process all the other foods for the rest of those, 60
Are
minutes
you
to hours.
for or against intermittent fasting? What's your thoughts about that when it comes to a healthy heart?
I think I'd always consult with your doctor, right? Because there's certain conditions that people have, like if you're diabetic and there's certain medications that you're supposed to be taking with meals 3 times a day. You have to be careful about intermittent fasting. But I think overall it does decrease the amount of calories that you're eating, right?
Okay.
Now, if you're going to use those 8 hours and eat everything that you would normally eat in 12 hours in 8 hours, well, that's a problem. But I think there's good data for intermittent fasting to limit the amount of foods you're eating to other. Some people skip breakfast, some people skip dinner, or they just have dinner earlier in the day. So you're not eating dinner at 8, 9 o'clock at night and then going to bed at 10 or 11. So I think there's definite benefits to it, but I think you have to check with your doctor first to make sure that it's healthy for you.
Okay.
And then, one other kind of quick, or not quick per se, but healthier way to cook foods, right? So if you're going to be eating animal protein, if you're not going to be able to switch to a plant-based diet, instead of frying foods, right, really thinking about baking, boiling, or steaming them instead.
Okay.
You're taking away a lot of the oils and a lot of the unhealthy things that go into frying meals that can overall just make the meat that you're eating, if you decide to continue eating meat, to make it much more healthy. Okay, so hopefully those are some tips. There's tons of others that I can give you as we go by, but those are some starter tips, right? Increasing the amount of water that you're drinking and substituting that. People always ask me at this point, what about coffee? I'm like, coffee overall is
coffee and tea. Isn't tea technically drinking a cup of water? Please say yes.
Right? So yes, coffee and tea are usually considered safe. But if there's certain heart conditions where you should limit the amount of caffeine, especially if you have abnormal heart rhythm, something called atrial fibrillation, you should consider decreasing the amount of caffeine. But overall, in general, I mean, a cup of coffee in the morning or so is not gonna harm you.
Well, I want to touch on those conditions because I feel like you probably see people that have similar conditions, similar complaints, similar histories. What are you seeing and what do you say to them? And what are some of the major complaints they have when it comes to they want to improve, but they can't, they feel a certain way? What do you say to them?
I think it starts with a strong mindset, right? So education, strong mindset, and time. And you have to be dedicated to this. This is not small fries. So a lot of times when I talk to patients or I'm seeing someone for the first time and they have heart disease and they have high blood pressure, I may take my first visit to go over and educate them about their disease, what they have, and how they can treat it. But I think I will also say to them, next time you come, we're going to spend a good 20 minutes talking about diet, talking about ways that you can do this with your food to make you more healthy. So I think having dedicated time is going to be really, really important. Because this is not something that's gonna happen once, right? So one talk is not gonna get somebody to all of a sudden change their life. That's the rare aha moment, I call it, when someone says, "Oh, I'm gonna make this full change." But it requires repetition. It requires them hearing it over and over again for them to really make a change. And a lot of time the change is gradual. So I may give them the water tip. Okay, and a lot of people come into the office and they have their soda in their hand and etc. And I'm like, okay, here's a perfect example of how you make one change. And then next visit, you give them another example. So I think doing things slowly, continuously, and making sure the message is consistent. Eventually, people can make change.
What are some of the biggest questions they have when it comes to their heart health? Are they asking about what is it? What is the conditions? How did it get to where they are? What are some of those common things that people probably watching now might have questions about, or they have similar, concerns?
So yes, lots of people ask about what their condition is, how did it happen to them? Because I think the main thing they want to know is how can they prevent it from happening again, or how can they make sure that it's under control so it doesn't affect their overall lifestyle. Because there's lots of people with heart disease who are living full lifestyles, who are working, who are being productive members of society, right? I think a lot of times people have a misconception that once you have heart disease, it's always going to be disabling, and that's not the case. So
it can be reversed if you do modifications.
So the ideal is to reverse heart disease. The reality is we need to keep it in check so that people can still live full, healthy lives, right? So I call it living with heart disease, not being disabled from it or crippled because of it. But there's a lot of people who are living with heart disease, going to their doctors on a regular basis and taking and heeding our advice about diet and exercise.
Mm-hmm. You find that a lot of your cardiologists or primary care physicians, community organizations are implementing more interventions now when it comes to helping people reduce their heart disease risk?
I think we are seeing that. I think we are learning as we go through medicine that prevention is key.
Yeah.
I think years ago, we were incentivized more to really emphasize treating the disease instead of trying to prevent it. And when I say incentivize, I mean it's what we knew, right? It's what we got taught in medical school. We don't get taught how to teach people to eat healthier in classes. So I think now people are realizing that we have such a high burden of heart disease in this country. It's the #1 killer of both men and women in the United States. So we have to really emphasize prevention. And so a lot more doctors, a lot more patients are also coming to me as a cardiologist saying, hey, I don't have heart disease, but it runs in my family. Or I have heart disease and I don't want to get it. So what can I do? What do you advise me to do now to prevent that from happening in the future?
And that's so important. I think that a lot of people don't think about that when it comes to, well, I'm okay, so I'm not going to talk about it. But you got to understand your family history. It's there and it can pop up when you least expect it.
Exactly. Heart disease doesn't tend to announce itself before it comes. It can give you some warning signs, but I think prevention is the best thing to do to make sure that you're living a heart healthy lifestyle starting from a young age and carrying that through into adulthood, and really making sure that we're sticking to it. Everyone's going to go off the beaten path, and I had a patient come to me the other day and say, oh, it was my 70th birthday, and man, let me show you the pictures of what I was eating, almost as a confession. And I said, hey, I did tell you, it's your birthday, you can enjoy yourself, but make sure you get back on track. Make sure you know how to get back onto the horse, right? And get back onto eating healthy.
Right. You mentioned something about signs, warning signs. It doesn't announce itself, but there are warning signs. What are some that we should be aware of?
So if someone is experiencing chest discomfort or pain in the chest, especially when you're doing activity. So if you're walking and you notice it, or if you're, being active, cleaning the house or doing your chores, going to a supermarket, etc., and you're noticing pain or pressure on your chest, that's a big red flag that you need to be evaluated for heart disease.
Okay.
If you're feeling more short of breath or winded, and this is a change or something that's new, definitely get evaluated and make sure that there's no underlying heart disease that's brewing. Sometimes it can be more subtle. Sometimes it could be just fatigue. I don't feel the way I used to, or when I try to do things, I feel dizzy, I feel lightheaded. If you notice a change in your body, as a physician, as a doctor, I would much rather you come to me and have it be a false alarm than you stay home and miss something that could truly be a problem that we could have treated. Okay. So listen to your body, you know it best than anything else. But if you've noticed a change, especially with your breathing, feeling short of breath, feeling winded, especially if you're having pain or pressure on the chest, especially in the center of your chest when you're working or doing activity, those are definitely red flags to let your doctor know, hey, I think you should be checking my heart and making sure that I'm still doing well.
And so I wanted to make sure that we touched on someone's question. They wanted to confirm what you said the blood pressure numbers were.
Yeah, so a normal blood pressure, the top number or your systolic blood pressure should be less than 130, and that bottom number should be less than 80. So if you have a blood pressure that's 135 over 85, and that gets checked again, so you usually have to have 2 checks to make sure, and it should be about a month apart, then that's a confirmed diagnosis of high blood pressure or hypertension. If your blood pressure is 112 over 60, you're doing great, and that's exactly where we want you to be. So that cutoff, less than 130 over less than 80, is what we consider normal or not having high blood pressure.
Okay, so hopefully everybody got that, what the number should be. I want to ask you about potassium, because I've been hearing a lot about potassium. I mean, we know about it, but what are some of the foods, what are the benefits of it with regards to high blood pressure?
So when you think about diets that are healthy for patients with high blood pressure, the main thing is salt. And the #1 thing is limiting salt. But the second part of that also is increasing the potassium intake in your diet. And that has a lot of chemistry and science behind how it causes the blood vessels to relax. And so one of my favorite substitutes is, if you've heard of Mrs. Dash seasonings.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Mrs. Dash is a salt substitute or a sodium substitute. And the salt that is in that is called potassium chloride. So it's adding potassium, getting rid of sodium. Sodium chloride was usually what we think of when we think of salt or table salt. And that sodium part is really what the Achilles heel of high blood pressure is. So seasonings like Mrs. Dash incorporate potassium, so you're getting the extra potassium in your diet, and then eliminating the sodium. So yeah, potassium is a key electrolyte that makes up a kind of part of the chemical balance that helps to regulate blood pressure.
Okay, so potassium, look out for potassium foods. Those are good for regulating blood pressure. In addition to potassium-rich foods, what would you say would be like 3 foods that we should have in our diet daily, like that are just going to be the best for our heart? Our heart's going to be jumping for joy.
So first thing is fruits, right? So if you can incorporate fruits into your diet, that's going to be a big
Any
help.
particular kind?
No, all fruits are good for you.
All fruits created equally. Okay.
There are some, depending on if you're diabetic or not, that they release their sugars more slowly or not. But overall, the sugars in fruits are better processed by your body than the sugars in cakes, candies, ice cream, etc. Okay, so
stop telling me what I can't eat anymore, Dr. Sankasani. Please.
So there's 2 ways I say you can incorporate fruits into your diet. One is with breakfast. It's a really good breakfast item, and people tend to think of fruits with breakfast. But the other part is to think of it for dessert. So instead of having that cake and cookie and ice cream, maybe have a nice bowl of sweet strawberries or raspberries or whatever it may be. That will be a little bit healthier. So that's one thing. So incorporating more fruits. The next thing is incorporating more vegetables. And the way I try to do that is I think of it as colors. So I like having my orange carrots, my red peppers, my red tomatoes, my spinach, and etc. So if you're incorporating vegetables of different colors, your plate looks pretty and it makes you want to eat better, at least for me.
And hey, it works for visual people, yes.
and then it incorporates that healthy nutrients that you need from vegetables more easily. And then the third thing I would say is to incorporate more fish into your diet. Okay. So of all the type of animal proteins that's out there, fish has the best data and evidence, and the best kind of fats. So the kind of fats that are in fish are the omega-3s, omega-6, the ones that people are even taking now in pill form, right? So just if you're going to take them in pill form, right, just take them in natural form and eat fish as the best kind of protein supplement. Definitely better than red meat, better than pork, better than chicken. Okay, so incorporating at least 2 to 3 servings of fish a week with vegetables and fruits. If you can do that and then drink more water, you're going to see a big change in your diet.
Wow, I love that. So more fruits, more vegetables, a couple servings of fish, and water. Let me just write this down and change my life. Everybody just join me doing it this week. Let's all get better this weekend when it comes to this. Well, Dr. Sankasani, thank you so much for all this valuable information. I know we all take care of other people, but sometimes we just need to take care of ourselves, or oftentimes we need to take care of ourselves and then encourage the same healthy living in those around us. So thank you so much for all the information that you have given us today. Everybody watching, make sure you share this episode, but save this video because you're going to want to come back to it, get all this information you gave us. Your heart will thank you. So thank you again. Thank you for all the viewers for being such an engaging and wonderful audience. And I will see you all again next week, where I'll be bringing awareness to another important disease that disproportionately affects our community, and that is sickle cell disease. So thank you all, and I will see you again next week. Bye, everyone.